This might be fascinating. I don't use the word interesting because the word is overused. And usually it's used to disguise something. There's usually something behind the word. When someone says, that's interesting, it could mean a lot of things. It could mean you're really dumb to say that. So I'm not going to say this is interesting, but I think it's going to be fascinating. And so I think you might enjoy just getting behind the curtain a little bit of how retired pastors make a living. Some of you are retired, so you'll be listening to this. Some of you are maybe nearing retirement, and so you will be listening to this as well. But I think it's pretty fascinating. Now, we'll tell you where we got the information in just a moment. But before we go to the top 4 sources of income for retired pastors, we are going to thank Belay. Hey, we're talking about work, and you ever felt maxed out at your job? Well, you may need someone that Belay can provide to take some of the burden off. Maybe an executive assistant, for example, maybe a bookkeeper, for example. Belay matches you and your organization with that person, and all of a sudden you have an incredible relationship with someone that is truly productive for you and your organization, particularly your church. Now, speaking of productivity, Belay has a new ebook called The Power of Productivity that is available free to our listeners and viewers. So how do you get it? You go to Thom at 55123 on your phone. That's text Thom at 55123 on your phone. Once again, that's THOM at 55123 to get this download. Okay. We're seeing the great retirement of not only pastors, but a lot of baby boomers. Just to give you a little bit of information, the baby boomers were at the time the largest generation in America's history. From 1946 to 1964, there were 76 million live births. The millennials ended up being slightly larger, but the boomers got a lot of attention because they were the first recorded baby boom, and therefore that's why we call them the boomers. So what's going on with boomer pastors? Well, many of them have retired. Many of them are approaching retirement, and many of them are asking questions about retirement. But you may just be interested in this because here's the reality. Most retired pastors are not taking care of themselves financially. Most retired pastors do not have the necessary income to support themselves, and if they have a spouse still living, going forward. So I've asked a lot of retired pastors. This is not a scientific survey. It's anecdotal information. But I've asked a lot of retired pastors if they're willing to share with me, what's your income? Not what is the number, but what are the sources of your income? I'm fascinated by the responses. And there's some cautions in here as we go through this. I did give the caution that this wasn't a scientific survey, that it was a lot of conversations I've had and anecdotal information. But I also will give some cautions about not being dependent upon one of these over the other, but we'll get to that in just a minute. All right, what is the number one source of income that I have heard from retired pastors? The number one source that I have heard is interim preaching or pastoring. The fact that pastors go back into the church to do interim work, either preaching and leaving or preaching and fulfilling an interim or temporary pastoral work, should come as no surprise. But you know what surprises me? Pastors told me that that was a greater source of income than the second one I'm going to mention, which is retirement income. So basically what I'm hearing in these conversations, the income that I get from interim pastoring or interim preaching is absolutely necessary because my retirement income is insufficient. So the number one source that I have heard of how they make a living in retirement is interim preaching or interim pastors. Again, not surprised that that is one of them. Surprised that more pastors tell me that that's number one. The second source of income for retired pastors is retirement income. Now, what do we mean by retirement income? Retirement income means that you saved up some funds for retirement, 401k, 403b, perhaps deferred retirement, and Social Security as well. Or you may have just had some non-deferred funds that you saved and you allocated them for retirement. Now you're living off of that. Well, it is telling that most pastors put that as number two and not number one. again, what I'm saying is there's not enough in number two that is sufficient for most of these retired pastors to make it financially. So they are depending upon outside income like interim preaching. But what is retirement income? Retirement income, I just indicated, is a 401k, a 403b. I'm not going to distinguish between the two. They serve basically the same function. It's money that you save that you take out. You don't have to pay taxes on it at the time, but when you take it out, now you have to pay taxes. And that retirement income is number two there. The issue of Social Security. Many lay people may not know this, but some pastors will have zero Social Security. They didn't pay into Social Security. They had the option early in their ministry to opt out or in, and they did not pay into it. And so many pastors do not have Social Security income, which for many retired people is the number one source of their income. So you need to know that as well. Not only is retirement income number two instead of number one, retirement income that includes Social Security for many people may not be Social Security for pastors. All right, what's the third source? The third source is they go work in the secular world part-time. I don't want to suggest that they're a Walmart greeter, some type of stereotype, but they might be. And so they see that they do not have enough money, so they're working in the secular world. I've discovered this a handful of times getting into an Uber car and talking to the older person driving. I find out that they are a retired pastor, and this is how they're making additional income. I was just in the Chicago area not too long ago, got in my Uber and started talking to the person, and the person actually picked me up at Tyndale. So he probably knew that I was a Christian and maybe an author. And so he asked me what I did, and I told him, and he said, yeah, I'm a retired pastor. I said, really? And I said, why do you drive Uber? Because I have to. He says, I enjoy getting to meet people, but it is a necessary source of income for me. So the third source of income for retired pastors that I'm talking to is in the secular world. The fourth, and it's not a big one, is Christian speaking conferences or maybe consulting. So I kind of lump those all into one, Christian speaking conferences or consulting. Again, most of the interim pastors I talk to don't indicate they have large amounts there, but most of them said they get a modest amount every year. So let's review these one more time. The top four sources of income for retired pastors. Number one is interim pastoring or preaching. So preaching just means you're there to preach and leave. Pastoring means you're taking on other responsibilities of the church. Retirement income is not number one, it's number two. And usually that is referring to deferred income like a 401k, a 403b, or in some cases, Social Security, which many pastors do not have. Number three source is secular income. I mentioned the Uber example. That is one example of how some pastors I've talked to are getting extra money. And then the other, relatively small, are conferences or consulting or speaking engagements other than preaching. What we're seeing is most retired pastors are having to put together several pieces to the puzzle in order to adequately provide for them and perhaps their family financially. There's just all kind of warning signs in here. If you're not into Social Security, you need to save more. Churches need to make certain that their pastors have an adequate retirement fund that they are contributing to the church as well as the pastor. We need to ask honest questions about are you really preparing for the future? And let me just mention something to you. I'm proud of my son Art at Christian Money Solutions. Go over to his site, christianmoneysolutions.com, and look at some of the things he's saying in this area, because he is working with a lot of Christians, including pastors, to help them in this area. So I hope that this is helpful. I hope it is insightful. And I hope it makes a difference not only with the retired pastors, but with those who are given the responsibility to take care of them financially. Thank you for being a part of the Church Answers podcast. Thank you, Belay, as always, for being our sponsor. Once again, remember the free download of the eBook, The Power of Productivity. Go to THOM at 55123. That's THOM. Put that in there after you dial 55123, and you'll get that free download. Okay, we'll see you in the next podcast. Hey, folks, this is a PS to our podcast. We got some exciting stuff that we want to offer you absolutely for free. Sam, when you think about predictive factors in a church's growth, if you take out demographics, what are some things that come to mind? Just two. I mean, don't give me a list of 10. Just two or three things that come to mind on predictive growth of a church.
Well, evangelism and whether the church is doing it or not.
Bingo.
And then I will add, is it an ongoing evangelism emphasis?
Double bingo. Well. And maybe something about leadership and their commitment to that. So all of the above.
Evangelistic churches have evangelistic pastors. Is the staff, is the lead pastor doing the work themselves?
We have a free download for you, and it's actually a sheet that you can self-score. You answer 20 questions, anywhere from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And we come back and we predict what your growth rate is going to be for the next year in worship attendance. It's not a perfect tool, but it's a good tool. There's a link to that for the attendance predictor. Look in the show notes. You'll absolutely love it. That's cool. We'll see you soon.